Report. Our scientist Ann Morrison's here, and we have tons of things to cover. Great announcement. Ann has her new blog website built by one of our listeners. It helped her tremendously. I want to thank him, and also Ann for her hard work to get this up. Website is Twiland, TWILAND.info. Can you give us the history of Twiland? And of course, if you go to the announcements and notices page on the front of Nutrimedical, you'll see a direct link to Twiland.info. You can also jump forward to the update as of today, May 22nd, which of course is the first of the Memorial Day weekend. And tell us a story about Twiland and your new blog.
Well, I think that we've kind of been lacking in getting out information on how to listen to God. And Twiland is a term that I coined to talk about those thin places that the Irish talk about. And the Irish have a long history of having conversations with God, and they call the places where where that happens thin places, as though the veil between God and man is thinner than it would be between the spiritual world and the natural world, and so they're more likely then to hear what God has to say in those places. And so I'm going to be providing some information about how to get there and how to listen to God.
That's really good. It's important because, and again, the God of science is also the God of spirituality, and the God of truth, and the God of is the source of all love and knowledge. So whether you're trying to solve problems with near space objects, or the change in the ozone layer, or physical health, or prepping because the world is in a state of chaos and what we call pre-cataclysm. And it's not managed by people that are either empathic with each other or the rest of humanity. It's run by idiots and Satanists. And it's unfortunate that that's the case. And many of the people that call themselves Christians are too silent. And to me, being a Christian means that you're, it's not a noun, it's a verb. You have to do. Shema, hear and do. If you aren't doing to save your fellow man and fellow woman and society and civilization, and you're not standing up to be a witness, then you aren't. It's that simple. You might know about Jesus, but you aren't walking like him. If you don't walk with him, you aren't. And I see us doing that. And you explain the science in a godly way. You explain how these things are all connected. And that kind of witnesses to people's intellect as well as their spirit, which I think you have to do both rather than just saying, well, believe me because I'm right. No, believe me because it's logical, number one, and number two, when you test it with prayer, you're going to find it spiritually true as well. So let's go through some of this great news that you have posted up here today. And, of course, there's some really nasty things going on, but there's also hope in the world. I don't want people to just be frightened by things like Ebola and all the other nasty things happening. There's always a solution to every problem we see.
Yes. Well, we hope so. I don't think that the political systems and the economic systems are going to let a lot of things be done. But at least we can point people in a direction that will ensure that they have a chance at surviving what's coming. We've talked about the decline in the number of species. There's been a big species die-off around the world, and that has occurred at other times when there's been a change in the Earth. And that doesn't mean it's an extinction level event. It just means that it's going to be a little harder to survive, and what we're going to do, what our children are going to do, is going to be different than what we do. In other words, there's going to be a new normal.
Exactly, a new normal. That's pretty amazing. Let's go through some of the issues of what's going on with Ebola. You mentioned that at the top of the articles here. What's happening with Ebola right now? Well, we have the male nurse, and he's been hospitalized in Rome, and he is feeling better. And 3 relatives have been quarantined and in Rome, and 10 persons who might have been exposed to him are being monitored in Sardinia, which is a big island just off the coast of Italy. Right. And he's the second person in Italy to get Ebola, and the first person. Confusions from his German and Spanish colleagues. Well, we're not sure that getting transfusions is going to help him because we don't know what kind of Ebola he has. Ebola has migrated to Ebola mecona,
instead of Ebola Zaire. And so people are presenting with both of those. And you need to know what type of Ebola the person has before you can get blood transfusions.
Now, is Ebola controlled in Africa, or is it still out of control?
Well, it's in Guinea. They're still finding it from people who attend funerals. And you have to understand that a person dying of Ebola has a very high viral load. That's when the viral load of that person is the highest, is when he dies. So transmission to persons who handle the body is likely. Now, you understand that in rich countries, there may be 40 medical personnel for each Ebola patient, but in poor countries, there may be 40 patients for each medical person. And Ebola is emerging as a threat to the rich countries because the poor countries are festering primate-killing Ebola. And we've got to change that ratio somehow.
I think the first year you had a good idea that we need to literally take people out of these remote villages where they're eating bushmeat and put them into areas you want to call colonies where they can be away from them and have a chance for us to clean up the wild areas that are killing the primates, like chimpanzees and great apes. We need to give them antipathogenics like our Nutrimedical. We need to have them getting clean food and to set up some kind of industry so they have an income. And we have to understand that as these third world countries go, we have a festering wound that's going to continue reinfecting the West. And eventually, if these viruses get endemic in our own pets and animals in other countries like North America or the Caribbean, they're not easily going to be removed. They're going to become endemic things that will stay there for centuries. And the problem is people don't understand how, in other words, we can't let these people in Africa die or it'll eventually come to get us.
Well, that's right. And once it's gotten into the carnivorous mammal population, it's going to be endemic in that country forever. I mean, you just can't kill all the carnivores that have it. You can't treat them. You can't even find them. And that's why it's so worrisome that they're letting Ebola patients have pet dogs that they aren't treating like a dog with rabies. That dog can be carrying Ebola. If it bites something, that person can get Ebola. And if it be so, we've got to take a stronger stance and understand that once Ebola moves into the carnivorous mammal population, it'll be endemic in that area.
Exactly. Now, the important thing that people should realize is that these principles we're talking about apply to resistant TB, like from South Africa, XMDR-TB, to resistant Clostridium difficile, to resistant organisms of all kinds like MRSA. There's been a doubling of the number of pathogenic organisms present in both animal and human populations since last year worldwide. And I talked about some of the drivers yesterday. What do you think of the primary drivers of why there's such an explosion of these pathogens worldwide in animal and human populations on every continent?
Well, and it is around the world. It's just astounding. For instance, how many bird flu varieties there are. I mean, they've doubled in the past 2 years. Since 2013 to 2015, there's twice as many countries that have some type of bird flu, and some of these countries have more than one type or another type of bird flu. H5N1, H5N2, H5N8, and H7, N9, and these are all based. They've already done the tracing on them, and they all trace back to H5N1. Well, is that possible outside of a laboratory? I don't think so.
No, in other words, they're being tweaked in laboratories, and that's one of the major causes. McCanney, interestingly, the powers that be do not want McCanney to connect to us, and I've had to even go to alternate days to get him on, where it's obvious that they're trying to block having Professor McCanney talking about some of the things because the synergism of his brilliant information and books. And by the way, his blog and his books and so on are directly above the notices for your blog and your science blog of Twiland. is a guidebook for the end times, and that's what it's a scientific guidebook to tell us that. And we keep on trying. I guess he just called in after he sent the keep trying message. So it looks like we may have him shortly. Professor McKinney, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can. You sound a little bit like you're not pulling hard enough on the string of your little can phone.
Well,
it sounds a little tinny, but we can hear you. But maybe you need to back off a bit. As they say in audio, it's called a little hot. In other words, it's a little tinny. If you're backing off just a bit, could you repeat? Say something.
Oh, okay. How's this? Is this any better? Or?
It's a little lower volume. You want to get the volume up a bit, but they can probably do that at the studio. It doesn't sound tinny though. Professor McKinney, we were just saying how powers that be don't want us to have dialogue. When we have Ann on with her new blog, twyland.com, we have your expertise and brilliance to say, you're up there with Archimedes, Einstein, and Velikovsky, and your analysis of astrophysics. In fact, I think I made a statement a few weeks ago that bad astrophysics understanding in science, which is taught by Tier 2 science by the public institutions, is also the basis for bad and very evil satanic policies of the global overlords that run this world. And bad policy based on bad science can also be cataclysmic to a civilization that's not preparing properly for what can happen to space weather, near space objects, coronal mass ejections, or anything. So really kudos to what you're doing. And I have, of course, a link out directly to your books, videos, and you even have a special sundial that you sent me. I got a copy of some of your latest videos and so on, and it's going to take me a while to get through them all. You've got a lot of material here. It's amazing. And of course, we now have Ann's blog right below yours, so this is going to be very, very good. What topics are you following lately on your show? Because you do a show over at jmccsci.com, Jim McKinney Science, jmccsci.com. What are the latest topics you're covering?
Well, Obama just gave a speech to the new cadets. I think this was of not the Naval Academy, I think it was the Coast Guard. But he said to them, you are the first graduates who will be in the world where we will militarize basically because of the global climate change, the military will take control of the world, and there will be a new world order because of climate change. Excuse me.
But I think he thinks he's on the ground floor. I think Obama's been given the Willy Wonka golden ticket.
Absolutely. And also, he's hitting on other fronts this whole issue of global warming. So it's a policy. It's an international policy under the UN. And mind you, what they're doing, the Jade Helm operation, this is all under the UN. Obama is working directly for the United Nations now. He said that in his first term. He said that when he started the war in Libya. He actually said he had consulted the United Nations. They told him what to do, and he didn't have to consult Congress. Remember that comment? Oh yeah. So yeah. So he should have been impeached right there on the spot. But right now they still need to impeach him because he can do a lot of damage to what's left of America between now and 2016 elections. But they do this. They go through this impeachment thing. They did it with Bush. They did it with Clinton. They always go through this. We're going to impeach them, and then what that does is it stalls the other side into this farce that maybe the next election or maybe if we get rid of this guy, he's just a guy holding an office. He's a middle manager,
right?
And so it's just another way of fooling the public and getting people to bite off on more time. But
exactly.
I think we are headed down the barrel here, literally, of a major. This Jade Helm deal is really, really coming. And we're already seeing this, the shootout with the bikers in Texas, very set up deal. Things are starting to get very strange. The local police joining with military, with UN, it's getting very strange. The other thing I wanted to mention, as long as I have the airtime here and that I'm actually connected, I'm working on finalizing a new book, and I'm not going to give out the title. It's going to have a very wide audience compared to my last book was The Wing Generator, dealing with alternative energy. Did not have what you could call a New York Times bestseller list audience because it really wasn't meant to be. Very particular audience. But this book, I've made some new discoveries that are rather earth-shattering, to say the least. And so I'm not going to say any more. I'll just say that just keep an eye out, because shortly, mixed in with all the other things that I'm doing, this book will be coming out. So keep an eye on that.
Right now, will it be something like dealing with revisions to the, like you talked about off air, the special and general theory of relativity and your observations and analysis that made sense, but the powers that be don't want to agree with you. And this will change, of course, a lot of our space projects and a lot of things that happen on Earth. A lot of people don't realize how much of space determines how we live, whether it's GPS and navigation guidance systems for your car, or cell phones, or satellite communications, or even credit cards that work through satellite transfer of funds, through electronic funds transfers through satellite. So much of our stuff now is based on space exploration. And I believe they bifurcated science. They have Tier 1 and Tier 2 science. They only allow the public to know about Tier 2. You constantly railed against this because you're basically trying to force them into dialoguing with you, and the powers that be don't want to because you can prove that they're wrong. And in many cases, they're purposely wrong.
They actually create groups that are trying to simulate what I do, that leave out topics like Planet X, but then they can argue with those people. And it's very strange to see, so they don't have to talk about Jim McCanney.
Right, isn't that wild? Yeah.
The amount of effort they're going through to try and sideline me is amazing, but the more they do, the more people find out about me. And I say that's actually an educational tool, because when people see the level of effort they're going through to try and sideline me, they go, well, gee, that's an indicator in itself that they don't want people listening to what I'm saying.
Yeah, we have you on with Ann on Fridays, but we also have separate times when we have you on other hours. And I think as we do that, we see a lot of resistance, because oftentimes your internet, your Skype is actually purposely shut off just for the show, then comes popping back on. The powers that be are freaked out by the fact that they don't want to see the synergism, because I'll ask some good questions and you've got some answers. When we come back, we're going to talk about CERN and how it ties in with global policies and what they're really planning on doing with CERN and what's going on. We have Ann talking about the plagues of doubling of all the pathogens in every continent now since last year. All these things happening very quickly. Back in a moment with Professor McKenney and Ann Morrison. Stay tuned. And welcome back. And great discussion on off-air. Let's continue that, Professor McKenney and Ann. You're talking about the massive expansion of dengue, of the flu. Can you go over some of those stats, Ann and Professor McKenney?
Let me Ann, just restate my question. I asked Ann off-air about for an update on the turkey problem in the upper Midwest, especially Minnesota. Where they have so-called teams of experts on site that have no idea what they're doing. Ann said the governor of Minnesota has declared a state of an emergency. And I also want to talk about dengue, which has a huge resurgence. And but anyway, Ann, with that, that's what I asked Ann off air, and then she started talking. So Ann, take the mic there.
Yeah, well, the big news is that Iowa now has 3 highly pathogenic avian influenzas, what they call HPAI, and it's within the state, and one of them is H5N2 and the other one is H5N8. Now, the H5N8, they think, came up from Mexico, and it affected
But this is in birds or people now?
Oh, it's highly pathogenic to birds. When you're talking about avian influenza, they don't even count the humans. H5N1 kills humans, but highly pathogenic means that it kills all the chickens, all the poultry. It doesn't. The case fatality rate for H5N1 in Egypt is 40%. I mean, we're talking a serious disease here.
Right.
And so they're always. They think that the virus is spread by wild birds that leave their droppings on farms, And but there can also be lateral movement, a little bit of flu on the dust or dander or something walked in from a person's shoes from one facility to another. And they're also saying that they're not getting as much ultraviolet because they've had a lot of storms and clouds, so they're not getting as much sunshine. But some of the facilities now have a shower in, shower out policy. You go to work and you shower, and hopefully you shower pretty good, and then you put on your PPE, that's personal protective equipment, and then you go and do your work around the poultry operation, and then before you go home, you dispose of your PPE so that it can be burned and or buried, and then you shower again, and hopefully that's a very thorough shower, and you put on your street clothes, and then you're allowed to leave.
Just a note here. When I was a kid, the family moved to my school. Eventually, they had a huge turkey farm, but eventually the parents both died about the same time of cancer. And then eventually this girl from our class died of cancer. All of the whole family from that farm died of cancer. But anyway, that's another issue dealing with turkey farms. Just showing you the amount of chemicals used on a turkey farm.
Well, it's not just chemicals, too. It's the growth of pathogens, because we know cancer is induced by intracellular pathogens like viruses and mycobacteria. In fact, the research on mycobacteria and cancer induction has gone back to the 1930s in Germany. So people should realize that it's not only toxic chemicals and radiotoxins, it's also stealth pathogens. And if you have a weakened animal like these turkeys loaded up with antibiotics to try to prevent massive superinfections, that's why turkey will often is a major cause, for example, of food poisoning, where you get some turkey and you get the turkey trots, they call it, because you actually have a pathogen in your gut and it's going crazy.
Because you didn't kill it when you cooked it.
Right.
Little speck did not get cooked.
Exactly.
In fact, Europe now will not buy, I believe it's pretty much across the board, they will not buy beef from the United States, because the United States has such a problem with contamination of the meat from bacteria, from salmonella, all kinds of things. And that's why there are warnings on the food when you buy it. Don't touch it, wash your hands, cook it thoroughly, etc. But there's many countries in the world now that do not use refrigeration for meat, for eggs, for milk, for anything. And they're doing just fine. They don't pasteurize, there's no refrigeration, etc. And so this idea that pasteurization and keeping meat cold and everything is a deal primarily in the United States because of the high amount of bacteria and now, with the avian flu and everything else. But the question I had posed to me by a person from the Midwest, is this an attack? Is this a war going on where it's a military bacteria and this is a direct attack on our food supply?
Of course it is. I believe so. There was a research virologist from Canberra that was actually the designer of Relenza, the antiviral drug, years ago, and he came out, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, that said that the flu outbreak that occurred in 2009 was directly a recombinant that could only have been created in a lab. So I think as we look at what's called the gene ontogeny of these new viruses that break out and how they break out and how they spread, it has all the markings of a false flag, a biogenetic false flag of a release to have plausible deniability. But if you're a scientist and look at this logically, you realize that this couldn't happen spontaneously. These are tweaked viruses that are getting back out in the wild and cross-infecting not only domestic animals but now people, and there's only a few receptor binding genes that are required for it to turn into a major human pandemic. For example, the H5N1 in Egypt right now has 18 times more case fatality rate than the 1918 plague that killed 600,000 Americans in 1918-1919. So, just take that number, 500,000 multiplied by 18. So you're talking about potentially, let's say, 9 million Americans die if it hit today.
Yeah, the H5N1 apparently was the first gene. If they look when they did their studies, their strain studies on the on the 106 new bird flu viruses, 106 of them now, they all started with H5N1. Well, why would you do that? Well, because we know that H5N1 kills people. And I think that if somebody in the lab wanted to kill people, they would tweak an H5N1 virus to create an H5N2 virus and hope that they carried over that human killing potential. And we don't know that they don't. We have found H5N2 in the blood of poultry workers. And they... Go ahead. Hello?
Keep talking, Ann.
Oh, and so they're giving them Tamiflu. They're saying, hey, take Tamiflu just in case. Well, we don't know that Tamiflu works against bird flu. There's no reason to expect that it would. But they're just trying to make the workers feel like they're safe while they're doing this very dangerous work.
Isn't that strange that taking care of turkeys is dangerous work, life-threatening?
Well, yes, and but see that you don't see that in the newspapers. I mean, I just read about it in a scientific journal, and so anyway, to get back to your dengue, what happened was dengue was introduced into the Caribbean last year. Before that, it hadn't been in the Caribbean, it hadn't been in the Western Hemisphere. And there were reports that suggested that if it could get into the United States, there was already a mosquito that would carry it up to New York City. In other words, this mosquito was far-ranging. And sure enough, that happened. We had our first cases in Florida, and now we have them all along the East Coast.
And, of course, people vacation there and bring it back.
Well, yeah, they do that. Yeah, that's probably how it got over here. And it's a new normal. That's what we've got here. We've got a new normal, and we have to learn.
I'm back on Skype now. I guess my accent.
You're still looking for that.
One of the issues that you see happen us as a nation and personally, because we are trying to remember the Memorial Day weekend about the loss of lives and blood and treasure for our veterans, but also the blood of Yeshua Jesus that gave us the Constitution, because it's based on the Bible and the biblical principles that make us sovereigns, made in the image of God. We have bad astrophysics. In fact, this is one of the points that I want to make again, that when we ask the question, why are the globalists panicking and why are they tweaking viruses, and it's obvious to create a worldwide pandemic, why are they trying to get laws passed like the Trans-Pacific and Transatlantic Partnership? Why are they trying to get rid of physical money and move to a matrix where it's all electronic divots? And if you ask all these tough questions, you realize it's not a conspiracy theory, that there really are a bunch of very evil people that are very frightened by something incoming. As Professor McCanney's been saying for many years, Planet X, a dwarf star or a large planetoid-like comet, and these effects on the gravitonic waves that can cause a lithospheric disjunction where the crust or lithosphere gets separates from the mantle and you have major geotectonic events, is a very real thing because it's how the mountains were formed. It's pretty certain that the globalists have more Tier 1 information about the science of this. How would you respond to that question, Professor McCanney? And because it's obvious that the number of new plague viruses circulating in the world and all of the fingerprints of a tweaked, plausibly deniable super plague is coming. What would you say, Professor McCanney?
Absolutely. There's an expression, desperate people do desperate things.
Right.
And that couldn't be any more true than today. What they need in this, like the Jade Helm operation, the fact that now stores are limiting very severely the amount of ammunition you can buy. Everything is being manipulated. The government buying up all of the ammunition, and then only allowing like 1 year limit on the firing pins, or the firing caps, I should say, that go into shells. In other words, they're only good for a short amount of time. for the local hunting season or whatever, and then you have to rebuy them. But it's, everything that's going on certainly tells you that I saw a good line that said they shouldn't be taking the guns out of the hands of the civilians, they should be taking them out of the hands of the government. The entire, the government was never authorized to have a standing army, and certainly never to use it within the confines of the United States for operations like the military operation Jade Helm is totally illegal. But when you realize that the government of the United States is not our government, it's a shadow government. You don't elect the president. They're working for the UN. All the water rights have been given over to evil people. But now what we're seeing here is a direct attack on the food supply, the drought in California, where it took a number of years to actually use up the groundwater supply. You have people like, what's his name? It's just sucking all the water out of the Ogallala aquifer at the southern end in Texas, our good buddy Buffett.
T. Boone Pickens and all these people that are
absolutely
hydrofracking, and they're putting toxic chemicals down too, rather than using a web technology they call it doesn't use chemicals that can use microwaves and so on for fracking. So instead, they're destroying the aquifers. It's all a process of deconstructing America. So we lose our food security, our job security, our money, and demilitarize us by even downgrading our nuclear and other forces, so we become useless.
Yeah, when I was on John Moore's show this week, I said that what is needed, I told John, I said, if you want a new product to sell, get a hold of some RPGs, some rocket-propelled grenades. And that's the one thing that's missing in the arsenal of the civilian population. Because tanks and armored personnel carriers, if you can stop even a few of those, that forces the personnel out on the street, and now they're exposed. They're going to be much more out in the open because they don't have any place to go. They're going to be walking up and down the street. And besides, if you understand what's going on with Jade Helm, those are foreign soldiers. They're not going to allow those people to exist for very long. They're not going to have supply lines, etc. So this is going to be a very strange set of operations, because they can't let an army in here that could turn its back and all of a sudden take over Washington and say, hey, we're in charge now. Because, those politicians, when you saw those fat little guys running out the congressional house during 9/11, they could hardly waddle down the steps.
Right.
So it's not like they have any power themselves. They're just little, doughboys running around the congressional office. So they depend on goons. But the problem with depending on goons is, hey, they're goons to you too. If they turn on Washington and say, hey, now we're going to run the country, and which could very likely happen. So they can't allow that to happen. So they have to give these people a pill of some kind or cut off their supplies. So they can't let them out there for too long, because they could actually gain power. In fact, they could actually join sides with the people and really take over Washington.
But so which is likely
they got
to
a
happen,
problem.
Actually. Yeah, they have a double problem. And of course, if you wanted to make an RPG, there's lots of creative ways you can launch a small propane tank on a crossbow or a longbow. You could have a small solid fuel rocket you contain with just red phosphorus, sugar, gunpowder, which is basically
aluminum,
just ground up.
Rocket fuel, solid rocket fuel is ground up tire rubber that's high sulfur content rubber, aluminum ground up very fine, and sulfur. That's it. That's rocket fuel.
Right, so it's easy to make it. In other words, if you had a simple tube and you want to launch a small propane tank, one of these little mini propane tanks, you don't even need to put a detonator on it. All you do is have the propane tank with a solid fuel rocket that has fuel and incendiary material, and if it strikes a tank, that tank, a Bearcat's blown to pieces.
Yeah, so the other thing is the heat that's generated would cook the people inside. Right. So they're going to have to get out. So the thing is, you don't have to take out all the armored personnel carriers, just a couple of them. Because in like in any war, once you kill a few of them, you start picking up their guns and their ammo. I mean, that's how Fidel took over Cuba, by attacking bases and taking their guns. And so, and then the more he did, the more powerful they got. And when they were done, they were marching. They had the whole country following them into Havana that day. So that's how civilian. Look at Vietnam. They had B-52 bombers every day over there, and they couldn't do in the population, which is, so let's imagine a 1,000,000-man army in Jade Helm, which they don't have. They couldn't take over one city, let alone the country. So I don't know what they think they're doing.
I know what it is. I call it terror pornography. They're trying to frighten the public that if there's let's say a bioweapon release, we'll collaborate with them because we'll be afraid of martial law. But all it's going to do is aggravate us. That's why, I'm armed to the teeth, and I know how to make lots of exotic weapons with things out of my garage that are much more dangerous than the things they consider very top weapons. So if they think that they can actually take us on, they're actually delusional.
Yeah, it's just so they, like, we go back to the original point. The people in charge who think they're in charge are really not.
Well, they all have delegated authority. Their authority comes from us, so that's the whole basis of a constitutional republic, is that all of their authority for a congressman, senator, or the president, they're basically our chief employees. They're not our boss. Right. And neither is the Patriot Act reasonable or constitutionally valid. That's why when I hear Jeb Bush say it, it should immediately disqualify him as a candidate for president. Who does he think he is?
Well, he's the third Bush, Right, and Hillary would be the second Clinton.
Yeah, a nascent dictator-in-chief. So the most important thing, I think, remembering Memorial Day is all the young men and women that died to give us liberty, and yet are we going to disrespect that blood and treasure? Are we going to disrespect all the people that died so we would have a future in America? No. And we have to be a light to the rest of the world by honoring our veterans and by honoring the people who stood up for the Constitution. And we're going to be bringing on experts next week, jurisdictionary, Dr. Fred Graves on how to bring back the Constitutional Republic, Clint Richardson on the corporation nation. Professor McCanney, I need to talk to you. We need to get back in for it. Congratulations, Dan, on Thailand.info on the website. And everybody sign up, hands update email. It helps with what it's doing. It helps more